Valerie. Welcome back to another week's What's for Dinner. If you're new here, welcome. I would love if you would hit that subscribe button and join my YouTube family. I put out What's for Dinner videos every week, and I hope that you enjoy the next 3 inspirational meals that I have for you. And if you do enjoy them, go ahead and leave a like and a comment down below to let me know that you like them. I really appreciate your support, and you all mean the world to me, so let's just get started. This first meal is an easy, cheesy chili mac. I'm starting off by browning a pound of ground beef in my Dutch oven over medium heat. You can use any medium to large size skillet. This is actually my first time using my new Dutch oven, and I'm so excited to get to use this over the winter months, but I was testing it out for the first time. Once that's all brown, you're going to remove your excess grease. I actually saw over on Taylor Elmore's video that she used like a turkey baster to remove the grease. I didn't have one, so I went and bought one, just a cheap one, like at the Dollar Tree. Do not do that. It was horrible. Like, as you can see, grease was just pouring right out of it. Like, it didn't keep any suction at all. So that's fine though. Either way, I went ahead and got the new Aldi one, which you guys will be seeing that I got anyways. And now I'm just going to go ahead and season that with some garlic powder. The recipe is going to actually call to season the meat in a bit here, but I always season my ground beef a little bit at least before I add anything else. So I did add some garlic powder since that's one of my favorite things. And now I'm going to go ahead and add in a cup of beef broth, a can of Rotel, and a can of tomato sauce, an 8-ounce can of tomato sauce. And then you're going to go ahead and add in 1 cup of milk, and I'm just going to go ahead and give that all a good stir. Next, I'm going to be adding in 1 teaspoon of oregano, and then 1 teaspoon of cumin, as well as half a teaspoon of salt, and then the remainder of the garlic powder that I have left, but it does call for 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. Then it calls for 2 tablespoons of chili powder. I added in 1 tablespoon and stirred it all together because I wanted to kind of taste it and see if I wanted more chili powder. And yeah, the extra chili powder was fine for me. If you want, you should do the same thing if you don't like too much spice or too much flavor from chili powder. So yeah, I just added 1, tasted it, added the additional, and now I am adding in some onion powder, which the recipe doesn't call for, but I thought it sounded really good. And I just gave that all a stir, and now I'm going to go ahead and add in 1.5 cups of elbow noodles. I'm just using regular elbow noodles, not the large variation. And then just go ahead and stir your noodles in, and I kind of patted them down to make sure they were under all the liquid. Then I just put the lid on top of my pot, and I'm going to go ahead and cook that, reduce the heat to low first, and then I'm going to go ahead and cook that for about 15 to 20 minutes. I do believe mine took about 20 minutes. And once the noodles were all ready, I'm just going to go ahead and add in the cheese, and it calls for cheddar cheese, and it calls for 1.5 cups of shredded cheddar cheese. So I kind of just add that in parts, and then I stir in between. I find this easier to melt the cheese more evenly. So yeah, just go ahead and add a little bit at a time until you get all your cheese in there, and just keep stirring. If you want more or less, then just go ahead and adjust that to your liking. 1.5 cups is kind of great for this. I might have used a little bit more because we do really love cheese. And I had the salad kit in my fridge to use up that I needed to use up, so I went ahead and paired that with this meal. It wasn't exactly complimentary to the meal, but it was really good nonetheless. And the actual like chili mac was delicious, had so much good flavor. I'm not a huge fan of lots of ground beef like that, so for me I preferred more pasta over beef, but my boyfriend liked the more beef. It was very tasty though. This next meal is a Greek turkey and rice skillet. I've actually included a little clip of me showing you the ingredients before making the meal. Let me know in the comments down below if that's something you guys would like me to start trying to do for you. So I'll just show you what we're going to kind of need for this recipe. You're going to need some Italian parsley, some sun-dried tomato halves, some spinach, some frozen spinach. I believe it calls for 1/4 pound. This package is 10 ounces, so it's closer to the half a pound mark, so I'm probably only gonna use half of that. It also asks for a lemon, and then of course your ground turkey. I have that in a container I was in my refrigerator. And you're gonna need a cup of rice, as well as some Kalamata olives, and then a 1.5 cups of chicken broth, and I'm just using the Better Than bouillon to make that. I'm also gonna need just some cracked black pepper, some salt, some oregano, and then some feta And that is all the ingredients for that meal, and so let's just get started on that. I'm starting off by adding a tablespoon of olive oil to my large skillet and some fresh garlic, which I actually forgot to mention in that list of ingredients earlier. It calls for 2 cloves of garlic minced, and I'm adding maybe 3 to 4 minced, and I'm just gonna go ahead and get those in the oil, kind of break it up and let it cook for just a few seconds. Then I'm going to go ahead and add in my pound of ground turkey, and I'm going to use my meat chopping tool to kind of just break that apart a little bit before I season it. I'm going to be seasoning that with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, as well as a teaspoon of oregano and some fresh cracked black pepper, just to taste, whatever amount you would typically use to season your meat. And I'm kind of stirring that together, as well as breaking up my meats even further, because I don't like big chunks of meat. And while that meat was browning up, I'm just going to go ahead and cut up my olives. It calls for 1/2 cup of Kalamata olives, so yeah, I'm just slicing those up. And then it also calls for some sun-dried tomato halves. I believe it calls for 1/3 cup, and I just have the dried variation, not the ones in oil, and they worked out perfectly. I just got those at the Dollar Tree actually, so yeah, they were easily accessible and cheap, and they have so many uses. So yeah, I'm just slicing those up into some thin little like julienne strips there. Now I'm adding in a cup of white long grain rice that I went ahead and rinsed and drained, and now I'm adding in those chopped up olives and sun-dried tomatoes and just giving that all a good stir. And now I'm adding in my frozen spinach. I kind of broke that up. And then it calls for some chicken broth. This is 1.5 cups chicken broth. I am going to make a little note on that later on, so wait for the end of the recipe for this part. But now I'm just kind of pressing that rice down into the liquid, and I also moved the spinach to the center of my pan. I just feel like it works out better for my pan and how the middle kind of dips up, so my liquid kind of goes to the sides. I let that come to a boil, then I put my lid on, and I'm just lowering the heat to a medium low, and I'm going to let that simmer for about 15 minutes. And then you're supposed to let it rest for an additional 10 minutes. I wanted some extra veggies with this, and I thought zucchini sounded amazing with it, and it was. So I'm just cutting up 2 large zucchinis. I cut them in half, and then I'm just cutting them in half again lengthwise and making them into some little spears. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw this in a bowl and toss them with some olive oil, as well as some garlic powder, salt, some black pepper. And I'm just going to go ahead and give those all a good stir with my tongs, making sure that all of them get coated with the oil and the seasonings. And then I'm going to throw those in my air fryer basket, and I'm going to air fry them at 385 to 400 degrees, just depending on your air fryer, for about 15 minutes. It also just depends how soft or crisp you still want those. So this is the part where my rice mixture, it was done, and I was checking it. You're supposed to give it a quick stir and then place the lid back on and let it rest for 10 minutes. When testing it, my rice was still hard, and I do believe that this could have used some additional liquid. So I added some water in. Should have used chicken broth, but I was trying to move quickly here, and yeah, like I'm saying, it called for a cup of rice, but a cup and a half of liquid, and I think that it could have used 2 cups of liquid to start off with and simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes, that extra 5 minutes. In the end, adding the extra liquid in for me and the additional 5 minutes did work out, but I would have liked to have done that from the start, and I will be making this again for sure, because I loved it. So yeah, we'll just add that in. So anyways, while that was continuing to rest for 10 minutes, I went ahead and zested a lemon. It calls for half, but I wanted a whole lemon, and I chopped up a handful of parsley. So now my rice and turkey mixture is all done. So I'm going to go ahead and add in that lemon zest, and I'm just saving those lemon wedges to add to the bowls after. And I'm adding in that chopped parsley. Then I'm just going to go ahead and give that all a great stir. This was definitely one of my new favorite meals. I love Greek food and Mediterranean food in general. It's one of my favorites. I would have loved this with some pita bread and some yogurt, but I served it the way it was asked, for some feta on top, and there's those zucchinis and lemon wedges. It was really, really good. This last meal is garlic butter chicken and potatoes. I'm starting off by chopping up my cleaned gold potatoes. It says to use a pound. I'm using about 1.5 pounds because I like to have extra potatoes, or I love potatoes. So I definitely wanted some extra of those. And it says if they were larger than 1 inch to slice in half. I actually sliced them in half and then some of them into some smaller pieces, which was actually good because in the end these potatoes weren't quite done to my liking. So I feel like the smaller the potato, the easier it would cook alongside the chicken. Yeah, so I just chopped those up. Next, I'm adding chicken breast to my 9x13 baking dish, and I'm just using 2 chicken breasts that I went ahead and pounded evenly and then a little bit thinner. The recipe does call for 4, and I'm just using 2, and I'm just seasoning them accordingly with the salt, which calls for 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and I'm just kind of eyeing it like how I would normally season my chicken. And I'm also adding some garlic powder on them, which the recipe doesn't call for. Then I'm just placing those to one side of my baking dish. The recipe calls for 4 along the bottom and the potatoes placed on top. But since I was only cooking 2, I just pushed them to the side. I'm going to use the other half of my baking pan for those potatoes. So next I'm just placing those chopped up potatoes into that part of the baking dish, and I'm going to kind of just do my best job of spreading them out and getting them all kind of pressed down toward the bottom of the pan, because I want them all to kind of be covered by the butter when I pour that in. And so now it says to melt your butter in a large skillet. I don't see the need for a large skillet, so I'm just using this small one here. And it says to use a 1 stick or a 1/2 cup of unsalted butter. Because I'm doing less chicken, I started off with like 3/4 of the stick, and I did end up using the whole stick, and it worked out perfectly for still my couple chicken breasts, but I did have additional potatoes. So it also says to add 4 cloves of minced garlic to your melted butter. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that in there. I just pressed it right into that butter, and I'm just using a spatula to kind of mix that all around. And you'll also see me add in the rest of that remainder stick of butter that I didn't add in to start off with. And it says to let it rest for 5 minutes. I didn't. I didn't see a point in really waiting for it to like cool down, I guess. And I just added it right on top of my potatoes and my chicken, and made sure to get all those like bits of garlic out. I was using a rubber spatula, which really helped to scrape all those little bits off and get them on the potatoes and chicken. And I'm just kind of using that spatula to kind of push the potatoes around in that butter to get them to where they didn't look so dry. Was hoping that would really help them cook and evenly have lots of flavor. Then the recipe says to sprinkle a teaspoon of dried parsley as well as a 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. I'm just kind of eyeing it and putting across the top what I feel like I would like. Yeah, so just go ahead and do what you would like or measure that out. And then I went ahead and just baked that at 400 degrees for about 20 to 22 minutes. So I also wanted some fresh green beans with this, so I'm just putting some olive oil and some salt, pepper, garlic powder, maybe some onion powder, and I'm just going to go ahead and toss those all to coat them all with that seasoning and oil, and until I like that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and place those into my air fryer basket, and I'm going to air fry them at 400 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes, depending how crunchy you like them. After about 20 minutes, I took my chicken out, and I was making sure that it was at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature, and then I checked my potatoes for doneness, and those were not to my liking of doneness, but my chicken was. So I went ahead and just removed it from the baking dish. I didn't want it to cook any more because I don't want it to be all tough. The potatoes probably just needed about 5 more minutes. So I just plated that and set that in my microwave. And I'm also breaking those potatoes up, if there's some bigger chunks, into some smaller ones so that it can help it cook quicker. Because of course I don't want my chicken cold either, even though it will be going back in the oven with the cheese for a few minutes. I don't want it out too long. So yeah, I just baked those additional 5 minutes. And it worked out perfectly. They were so soft to my liking. And I put those chicken breasts back in and poured the juices back over them. And now I'm sprinkling a cup of mozzarella cheese on top that I went ahead and shredded, or about a cup's worth. It calls for a cup's worth for the 4 chicken breasts, but I just used about that for my 2 Anna on top of my potatoes. It also calls for a half a cup of shredded Italian blend cheese. I didn't want to open up a new bag of that. I did have it, but I had some Parmesan, just a little bit to use up, so I'm kind of just using that in place of that, and I'm just kind of crushing it up. And I'm going to go ahead and place that back in the oven for about, it says for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then turn it on to broil for the last minute so the cheese can get all nice and bubbly. As you can see there, there's those green beans. This was absolutely fabulous. Those potatoes were like heaven. They just melted in your mouth like buttery goodness. They were amazing. So was the chicken. This was a really great meal and we loved it. Thanks so much for watching, friends. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a like and a comment so you don't miss out on any future What's for Dinner videos. I hope you all have an amazing week.